Welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom, everybody. Before we get started, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss one of our deep dives. Today, we're diving into a controversy that has been making waves in South Africa. The drama surrounding the delegation to the Havana International Book Fair in 2025. Some really intriguing questions here. Accusations of political favoritism, debates about fairness, and a lot of skepticism swirling around the Minister of Sport, Arts, and Culture, Gayton McKenzie. Joining us today is our expert to help us unpack all of this. So maybe we could start with some background, like what exactly sparked this controversy, and who are the key players involved?
Well, the controversy really began when Gayton McKenzie, the leader of the Patriotic Alliance and the current Minister of Sport, Arts, and Culture, decided to shake things up for this year's book fair delegation. He felt that previous delegations hadn't been inclusive enough, so he insisted on adding more colored and white people to the list.
Okay, so McKenzie is facing some pretty serious accusations here. How has he responded to these claims?
McKenzie has been very vocal in defending his actions. He denies any cronyism, claiming that he only knows 2 people on the entire list. He's even gone as far as to say that racism shall never find a place under my watch. So he's really emphasizing his commitment to inclusivity and pushing back against these allegations.
It sounds like he's standing his ground. But even if we take him at his word, do you think his actions were justified? Was it fair for him to replace people who are already on the list?
That's where things get really interesting. You see, on the surface, you could argue that he, as the minister, has the right to make the final call about who goes to the book fair. But the way he went about it, by replacing people who were already selected, has definitely fueled doubts about his motives.
And I imagine this whole situation is raising concerns among his own party's supporters, right? I mean, the Patriotic Alliance has built its reputation on being a party of inclusion. Does this incident contradict that message?
Absolutely. The optics of the situation don't look good for the PA. Even if McKenzie's intentions were good, his actions could easily be interpreted as prioritizing political alliances over a fair and transparent selection process. This could definitely make some PA supporters question whether he's truly upholding the values they believe in.
And it's not just about the PA, right? This incident seems to feed into a much larger issue in South Africa, the growing distrust of politicians in general.
Exactly. South Africa has a long history of political corruption and broken promises, which has created a deep sense of skepticism towards anyone in a position of power.
So this controversy could be seen as just another example of politicians putting their own interests first, regardless of their party or their stated values.
That's the fear, isn't it? This whole incident plays right into that narrative of politicians being all the same, only interested in furthering their own agendas. And that cynicism can be really damaging to a democracy.
This is already pretty complex, but there's another layer to this story, right? Tell us about Unathi Nkai and why her inclusion in the delegation has become such a focal point.
Unathi Nkai is a well-known media personality in South Africa. She's an author, actor, singer, and radio host. She's also been very vocal about her excitement to be part of this delegation.
But her selection has attracted some criticism, hasn't it? Specifically from another prominent figure in the South African art scene, Ntiki Mazwai.
That's right. Ntiki Mazwai, a poet and activist, has publicly questioned Nkai's credentials as a writer, pointing out that her memoir was actually co-written. Mazwai feels that her own accomplishments and credentials were overlooked. To add fuel to the fire, she claims that she was initially invited to the book fair by a Cuban poet, but was then excluded from the final list.
So you have these 2 successful women, both involved in the arts, but with very different experiences and perspectives on this whole situation.
It really highlights how this controversy goes beyond just the actions of one politician. It's about representation, access, and who gets to have a voice on the international stage. And those are issues that resonate far beyond the specific incident.
This is clearly a lot more than just a debate about a book fair delegation. It seems to tap into some...
Absolutely. Despite the criticism back home, Nkai has been focusing on her role as a representative of South Africa. She even had the opportunity to perform for Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel. And she spoke about the evolution of South African culture over the past 30 years of democracy.
That's really interesting. So while there's this storm brewing back in South Africa, Nkai is actively engaging with the cultural exchange aspect of the book fair.
Exactly. It highlights the complexities of this situation. On one hand, you have this debate about fairness and representation in the selection process. And on the other, you have Nkai, who's making the most of this opportunity to showcase South African talent and culture.
It definitely adds another layer to the whole story. It makes you wonder how this controversy is being perceived internationally.
It's hard to say for sure, but I think it definitely raises questions about how South Africa presents itself on the world stage. This incident could be seen as a sign of internal divisions and political maneuvering, which might overshadow the positive contributions of the delegation.
That's a good point. It's almost like there are two competing narratives playing out here.
Exactly. There's the narrative of cultural exchange and artistic collaboration represented by Nkai's experience at the book fair. And then there's the narrative of political controversy and allegations of favoritism back home. It'll be interesting to see which narrative ultimately dominates the public perception of this event.
Now let's circle back to Nsiki Mazwai for a moment. It seems like her criticism goes beyond just questioning Nkai's credentials. It's also about the lack of transparency in the Department of Sport, Arts, and Culture's decision-making process.
You're absolutely right. Mazwai feels that her own accomplishments, including a master's degree in writing and a best-selling poetry anthology, were completely ignored. Her main argument is that the department's decision to exclude her, despite the invitation from the Cuban side, was arbitrary and unfair.
So she's basically saying that the system is rigged against those who don't have the right connections or political backing.
That's how she sees it. And it's a sentiment that resonates with many South Africans who feel that access and opportunity are often determined by who you know rather than what you've achieved.
I could see how that would be incredibly frustrating, especially for someone like Mazwai, who has worked hard to establish herself as a writer and activist.
Exactly. And this incident adds fuel to that fire of disillusionment. It reinforces the idea that those in power are more interested in serving their own interests than in supporting genuine talent and promoting inclusivity.
So where do we go from here? How do we even begin to address these deep-seated issues of distrust and inequality within the arts and culture sector?
It's a complex question with no easy answers. I think one crucial step is to demand more transparency from institutions like the Department of Sport, Arts, and Culture. There needs to be a clear and accountable selection process that prioritizes merit and inclusivity over political allegiances.
Yeah, that sounds like a good starting point. But it also feels like this goes beyond just reforming selection processes. Like it's about addressing the larger societal inequalities that create these imbalances in the first place.
Absolutely. We can't just focus on the symptoms. We need to address the root causes of these issues, which are deeply embedded in South Africa's history and social structures.
It's a monumental task, for sure. But this incident, as controversial as it is, could serve as a catalyst for meaningful change. It's brought these issues to the forefront of public discourse, forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our society.
And that's an important first step. By acknowledging these problems and engaging in open and honest dialogue, we can start to work towards solutions. Ignoring these issues will only exacerbate them in the long run.
It's a reminder that progress requires constant vigilance and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. Complacency is the enemy of progress. We need to hold our leaders accountable, demand transparency, and continue to push for a more equitable and inclusive society.
It's a long road ahead, but it's a journey worth taking. This incident, for all its complexities and controversies, has the potential to be a turning point. If we can learn from it and use it as a springboard for positive change, this whole conversation has really highlighted the disconnect between political rhetoric and reality. McKenzie talks about inclusivity, but his actions seem to contradict that message.
Yeah, it's a classic example of the gap between words and deeds, and unfortunately it's something we see far too often in politics. Politicians make grand promises, but when it comes to actually implementing those promises, things often get messy.
And that's where the cynicism comes in, right? People start to believe that all politicians are the same, regardless of their party or their stated ideals.
Exactly. This kind of incident reinforces that sense of disillusionment. It makes people question whether any politician can be trusted to truly act in the best interests of the people they represent.
So how do we break this cycle? How do we restore faith in the political system and ensure that those in power are held accountable for their actions?
Well, it's a challenge for sure. I think it requires a multi-pronged approach. First, we need to demand more transparency from our leaders. We need to know how decisions are being made and who is benefiting from those decisions.
Transparency is crucial, absolutely. But it also feels like we need a shift in mindset both from politicians and from citizens.
I agree. Politicians need to understand that their actions have consequences and that they will be held accountable for those actions. And citizens need to be more engaged, more informed, and more willing to hold their leaders' feet to the fire.
It's about reclaiming our collective power and demanding better from those who represent us.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we, the people, have the power to shape the future of our country. We can't afford to be passive observers. We need to be active participants in the political process.
And this incident, as disheartening as it may be, could be a catalyst for that kind of engagement. It sparked a conversation, raised awareness, and forced people to confront some uncomfortable truths about our society.
It's a reminder that change doesn't happen overnight. It requires sustained effort, vigilance, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
And it requires a belief that change is possible, that we can create a more just and equitable society if we work together.
On that note, I'd like to leave our listeners with a final thought. This controversy surrounding the Havana Book Fair delegation has exposed some deep-seated issues in South African society, but it's also an opportunity for reflection and growth. How can we as individuals and as a collective use this moment to push for meaningful change? How can we ensure that opportunities are truly accessible to all, regardless of their background or connections?
That's a powerful question, and one that we should all be grappling with. We encourage you to share your thoughts and perspectives in the comment section below. Let's keep this conversation going, because it's through dialogue, critical thinking, and collective action that we can create a better future for South Africa. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Havana Book Fair controversy. We'll see you next time on The Unseen Wisdom.